I have kind of this internal monologue that just narrates my entire day. And I just found out recently that not everyone has that apparently, but I've just taken it for granted. It's usually just chattering away in the background as I'm doing my work. So if I'm just doing something routine, like brushing my teeth or taking a shower, my monologue will just go on and on and on about what's happened maybe earlier that day, or maybe what happened the day before or last week, or what might happen today or in the near future. Most of the time, it's just this minor kind of quiet kind of preoccupation. It's never too often just this loud preponderance of noise. Which means it's fairly easy for me to have that going on when I'm doing a task or even when I'm having a conversation with someone. It's kind of easy for me to ignore, just kind of shut it out. But there are some times that preoccupation does turn to a sort of compulsion where there's not much that can distract me from that voice. It just becomes so loud and so overwhelming. And I feel at times like that, just like I have absolutely no control over my thoughts or my feelings. So I joke a lot about not being able to sleep. So when I talk to my colleagues and they're like, oh, how was your week or how was your weekend? I might tell them, I didn't sleep very well. And what they'll say is, oh, well, sometimes it's like that. And, we'll just have a little bit of a banter around my sleeping habits. And so sometimes I'll joke that, I haven't slept well since I took my first sociology class, which kind of implies that once I've learned all about, social inequalities, that suddenly I wasn't able to sleep because I couldn't bear this issue of these issues of social inequality. And I guess in some ways there's a little bit of truth to that, just because it's the problems we have to tackle in the world and in society are really, really difficult. And I guess you could say sometimes they do keep me up at night, but the kind of anxiety that I experience is a little bit different, I guess you could say. It's different than just kind of not being able to sleep. My partner actually was the first person that pointed out to me that I might have a mental health problem. I kind of, up until I was in my late 30s, never thought I had any mental health problems. I just thought the way I felt, the way I experienced the world was normal, and that everyone else kind of experienced similar kind of situations. Some of the earliest times I can remember having this kind of overwhelming feelings, just feeling kind of out of control of my thoughts, was in classes. So, and it was actually kind of a positive experience. It was a joyful experience because I would be sitting in class and the teacher would say something that would trigger me. And so that would just kind of send me down a mental kind of rabbit hole where I would be scribbling notes in a notepad, probably really awkwardly, and about some bizarre thing that I thought about when the teacher, that in response to what the teacher had said. And it was nice. It was funny because the teacher usually thought that meant that I knew the answer to some question they had asked, which was very rarely the case. It was usually a note about something that just connected in my brain to what they had said. And so then they would ask a very obvious question that I guess most of the people in class knew. And then I would answer with some random bizarre answer that they would just be like, oh yeah, okay, that's an interesting perspective, and let's all move on. At its best, these kind of moments created some tension for me, but at their worst moments, they were really damaging to my relationships and to my work. And this is, like I said, over the course of about 25 years of my life. So let me just give you a framework for how my anxiety works for me. Maybe this would be something that you could kind of have as a point of reference or something that relates to you. I don't know. But for me, most of my triggers revolve around relationships. And I don't know why that is, but when I see that a relationship might have something going on that I'm not comfortable with, that's usually the start of the trigger. That's usually what kind of kicks me off. And then I go on a spiral for about 4 or 5 days. Usually those triggers are somehow connected to feelings of fear. So it's either fear of being like abandoned or fear of being hurt or put in danger or put at risk, or maybe somebody I love and care about being in danger or being put at risk. And it doesn't have to be real danger. It's not as if somebody's holding a gun to a family member's head or anything. They're often just very innocuous triggers that, in my mind, become just something else entirely. So it could be serious things that are triggering it. It could be completely not serious things. So let me think of some examples here. For not serious things, it could just be an email asking me for information about one of my projects. And I'm not saying specifically that's the case in all the cases, but sometimes it is just as innocuous as that. And for whatever reason or another, my brain just goes into kind of fight or flight response. And then sometimes it can be a little bit more serious. Maybe I did something that I shouldn't have done, or I made a mistake somewhere, and then my brain kind of blows it out of proportion. So a lot of the times those triggers, they occur and I kind of go into panic mode, and my heart rate elevates almost instantly. Like the minute I finish reading that email, the minute I talk to somebody and I feel like something is not quite right, the minute I do something that I think may not be appropriate or may not be okay, my heart immediately kicks into high gear, like I'm just ready to kind of run a marathon. And my thoughts just spiral. And it's funny because people have always told me, like, don't think negative thoughts. And I don't really think negative thoughts when I'm spiraling. At least I'm not conscious of those thoughts being, negative in some way, shape, or form. It's more like the thoughts that I have are out of my control to have. So there's nothing I can do to prevent those thoughts from happening. But I don't really think of them normatively, like as if they're all negative thoughts, like I'm going to fail or something horrible is going to happen. A lot of times they're just, different scenarios. So when I'm spiraling, that spiral can last sometimes a few hours. At the best case scenario, it'll be a couple of hours before I can kind of set myself right again. In the worst cases, several days, several days. And I'll think about whatever relationship situation occurred, that trigger, I'll think about it over and over and over and over again. And I will play out the most bizarre to the most likely scenarios and kind of weight each of those scenarios according to the likelihood and the potential risk and everything else. And my brain just automatically goes into that overdrive mode, that kind of fight or flight mode. And so I'll think through the different outcomes that could possibly come out of the different scenarios, and I'll think about the different possible causes of what happened, and then start looking at the history and patterns that have kind of led to this particular situation. The most difficult part of it is that I don't have any control. I don't feel like I have any control over my thoughts or feelings, not just the way I'm thinking, but the emotions that come along with it. And so, to put it lightly, this can be distracting from work. To put it more realistically, it can be disabling. It can keep me from being able to do my job, certainly not do my job very well. And it can definitely hurt and damage my relationships with others because I can't be present fully, and I'm not able to be there for them, the people that I love, in any significant way. So during these times, my brain kind of creates a reality unto its own. And that reality is often very, very different than real reality. So whatever the trigger, whatever the situation is, my mind kind of takes and creates an alternate way of seeing it, and more importantly, an alternate way of feeling about it. So the feelings that I have around the way my brain has constructed the situation it's a very different way of responding than what would be appropriate in the situation at hand. So if the situation is just a completely innocuous email about, asking me a question about a project or just making a basic inquiry, my emotional reaction is not one of, oh yeah, here's the information you might need. My emotional reaction is more like, everything is falling apart. I cannot possibly keep it together, and the world is coming to an end. And I know that might sound like an exaggeration, but my emotional reaction is it's more aligned with that scenario than it is with the actual scenario. And I don't often even realize when it's happening. It actually takes me a lot of time to process those feelings before I realize that they're not matching reality, before I kind of acknowledge that what happened and the way I feel are two very different scenarios. And a lot of the time, these triggers, they just come with a lot of anger, a lot of resentment, a lot of hostility, a lot of just feelings of frustration, and directed at people who may or may not have actually intentionally done anything to harm me. And that's probably the worst part of it. And that's what can be so damaging to those relationships, is that I react to them as if they are trying to hurt me, when in fact they're just either asking for information or being completely just not trying to harm me at all. So it's hard to break from that imagination of someone trying to hurt me or someone I love. And a lot of times in these situations, I will, just in order to cope, I will turn to not terribly unhealthy behaviors, but unhealthy enough behaviors, whether that's like indulging in food or alcohol or anything else. So it's not something that I'm proud of by any stretch, and it's not something that I can talk about easily. But it is something that occurs far more frequently than I would like. It's part of my lifestyle. It's part of the way my brain is wired. And during these periods, I often imagine that I am physically getting ill. So I experience nausea in the sense that, like, there's no real cause of being nauseated, but at the same time, my brain is telling me, oh, you are probably going to get nauseated from this experience, or you are probably going to get a stomach ache, or, there's headaches and everything else. There's like physical manifestations that I imagine are going to happen, are going to come out of this experience. And usually I'll end up making a doctor appointment in the process and going and visit my general practitioner and telling her, oh, this is all happening to me. And then she'll just kind of note everything down calmly and, ask me to take some paracetamol or something, and then just leave it at that. She knows me well enough to know by now that these issues are rarely serious. The other thing that these experiences can trigger is some really intense depressive episodes. Sometimes only for a few hours, so it'll just mean that I'm kind of disconsolate, lethargic. I just kind of maybe lay around in bed or lay around on a couch. A few hours isn't so bad. Half a day is not too bad, but sometimes they can go on for days. And I've had experiences where I can't get out of bed. Just there's nothing in me. There's no kind of life to get myself to just function. There's nothing to get myself off of wherever I'm at, or get myself out of wherever I'm at. So these episodes can last sometimes weeks. Between the trigger and when I finally feel like I've recovered, it could be the better part of 10 days. And during that time period, at the worst, I might sleep 2 to 3 hours per night. Which kind of becomes a downward spiral in itself, because I'm getting less sleep and I'm then less able mentally to function and emotionally to function. So if any of this kind of resonates with you, if this sounds normal to you, then I would really highly recommend that you do what I did and seek treatment, seek psychological counseling. If this doesn't sound normal to you, great, but this was what I thought was normal for the better part of 25 years. I just thought this was the way everybody lived. I thought this was something that I didn't even consider it a struggle. I just considered it part of life. And thank goodness my partner brought it to my attention. They encouraged me to get therapy, to get some professional help, and I started therapy. And my therapist suggested some medications, and they've been helping a lot. They've really helped me with my emotional stability. They've helped me kind of disconnect my imagination from reality, or kind of maybe reconnect my imagination to reality. I'm not sure which, but my emotional response is a little bit less overwhelming. It's helped me sleep. And my therapist gave me some really good tools, and one of them is just self-soothing. I never heard of this idea before, and when they approached me about it, I just kind of thought, well, this seems like a little bit silly. Like, is that really going to do anything for me? But I tried it, and during these episodes, whenever I feel like things are out of control, just doing some basic, like, it's going to be okay, kind of talking myself and kind of coaching myself and reminding myself that everything's going to be okay and that it's probably not as bad as I think, can really be helpful to approach it kind of non-judgmentally and just to empathize with myself. I don't know if that sounds strange, but it did sound strange to me at first, but as I did it, I got more used to it. And they also encouraged me to do some expressive writing. So in during these episodes, when I feel a trigger coming on, especially at night, because that's often when it happens for me, to just write it down. Just fill a page full of words. Whatever's coming through your head, just put it onto that page. And that helps. And I don't even use a pencil and paper. Sometimes I'll just mime it. I'll just kind of pretend that I'm writing, with a pen or a pencil. Pretend that I'm writing on my pillow or on my sheet cover, and that helps. I don't know what it is about the movement or about connecting the written word with the thoughts that are going on in my head, but it really helps separate my emotional reaction, my physical reaction from the situation, and helps me understand a little bit more concretely what is happening in my life and not what I imagine is happening. Now I feel really lucky because after 25 plus years, I sleep fairly regularly. I don't necessarily sleep full nights every night, but I would say the majority of nights I get a full night's rest. I still have episodes. There's still triggers that happen that will put me out for maybe 3 or 4 days. But those episodes are less frequent now than they used to be. And they're not as long. They don't last 10 days or 2 weeks. They last less than a week sometimes, which is great. And they're not as severe. They never feel like I'm totally out of control. They're just a little bit more manageable. So my takeaway is kind of simple. If someone you love is experiencing something that you think might not be normal or typical, and I don't like that word normal, but we'll just use it in this context, just reach out to them, let them know. They may not even realize that what they're going through isn't what everyone else is going through. And if you're going through anything like what I described, take it seriously. These things tend not to kind of fix themselves. And it's fair to put these things on our partners or our friends. Our partners and our friends aren't therapists. They're not professionals. They will probably listen and they'll probably empathize, but it's not going to fix the fundamental problem if what you're struggling with is your mental health. So get help if you need it. Reach out to a therapist. It was the best decision I think I've made in my entire life. Take that first step. It'll really change your life.